government and police have failed to act on recommendations made 3 years ago by an expert panel set up by the Marikana inquiry looking into policing problems. Over the weekend, some of the issues that were faced in Nkandla are certainly not new to public policing in this country. Let me welcome to the show crime and justice expert David Bruce, and he's an independent researcher and for the Police and Prison Civil Rights Union, or rather the South African Policing Union spokesperson, Lesiba Thobakgele. Good evening to both of you, and thank you so much for your time. David, perhaps let me begin with you. We've heard from the police minister saying that they were unable to do anything about the crowds that had gathered in Nkandla because about 100 of them were seen to have been armed. Is there a clear way that police could have responded without aggravating the situation?
I think the simple answer to that is that they probably followed the most prudent course of action in that regard. There isn't, in a situation of this kind, it's essentially highly unpredictable, but there's a high potential for the situation to deteriorate and for police intervention to lead to the loss of life. So there isn't a simple way of simply disarming a heavily armed crowd. The
impression that it creates, of course, David, is that police then would leave armed and dangerous individuals, and yet if we are to compare what takes place at other protests, we find unarmed individuals that are often met with rubber bullets and stun grenades. So help us make sense of these responses.
Well, I mean, I think, what you're raising is a valid point that police responses to these situations are not necessarily consistent. And so, I don't want to defend the inappropriate use of rubber bullets in protests, particularly protests where people are conducting themselves peacefully or against individuals who are not acting violently. But all I would want to emphasize is that, the fact that police have perhaps misused force against people in some protests should not be seen as a motivation for, putting pressure on the police to act in a way that would not be appropriate in this situation.
Lesiba, from the perspective of your members, what are their considerations when it comes to situations that are seen to be volatile as what we've seen this past weekend?
As you have mentioned, Kathy, that Marikana has taught us a lesson in terms of how the police should respond to such situations. And we need to remember that police officials at all times, they need to assess circumstances that they are faced with at all times. And in most cases, they need to ensure that they are not found wanting in any way. And the situation at Nkandla, as it happened, as SAPO, we strongly believe that the police officials who were there, they have indeed applied their discretion in accordance, because imagine if they had then pursued to say there's a report or there's information that there are so many firearms that are there. If they tried to confiscate them, maybe something, terrible might have happened. Sometimes you don't need to provoke situations. And we need to remember what is the purpose of an arrest. An arrest is to present somebody before the courts. And whether you do it imminently or you do it at a later stage through an investigation, at the end of the day, as long as the objective of what you are doing is achieved. So we commend our police officials as well in terms of how they handled the situation, even though they were provoked. And the level of training that they have, we've seen it, coming into play. Because even when people are insulting you, even when people are becoming personal with you being a police official, you do not have to take it personal. And we've seen that being displayed fully so by our members, and of which we commend our members for such, because nobody was injured. There was no dangerous situation that went out of hand. And to us, we see it as a progressive way and really showing us that India is a country we are going forward in a better way of how police officials are approaching such situations. So
police were effectively allowed what was an illegal gathering to take place, and you define that as progressive. One of the views that has been expressed on the show tonight is that the police should have never allowed those thousands of people to gather in the first place, and that they were more responsive to what had happened and being in control of the situation, even in the days leading up to Sunday. Lesiba?
Unfortunately, Kathy, the police at all times, they find themselves heading to police situations that were not created by them. And in terms of how they reacted or they have dealt with that situation, whether they were able to manage it in that way where they say that that gathering should not occur. But if people forcefully were there, because you could see with some of the recordings that are there, you know, in the public space, where those who were coming, more especially from Durban, that convoy, when it came, the police tried to block them. So they tried through means of roadblocks, not that the police didn't do anything. And throughout, when that happened, they forced their way in. So that's why the police, they checked, you know what, instead of us being reactive, let's rather, you know what, open for these people to come in and do crowd control in a more general way. And that is what we are saying, that in how they respond, it is about whether the danger, is it an imminent danger that needs our police officials to respond to it at that time. So as it stands, they have applied their discretion based on the assessment that they have seen.
David, from a planning point of view, would you say that the police had actually prepared for the situation, given the fact that we've had warnings about this for some time?
Well, you see, I mean, I think there may be some validity to the question, to the criticism about not, you know, that there were advanced situations there were advanced warnings that the situation in Nkandla was going to escalate, and possibly there might have been more that they could have done preemptively. I think, you know, what we have to focus on right now, though, is the situation as it is right now. I think there is still, you know, the potential that things could further escalate. And so I think, you know, what's important at this stage is to take note of the fact that no one has been killed as yet in the situation, which has been highly volatile. And so, you know, one of the things that we would hope would be, you know, the eventual resolution of the situation is, on the one hand, that, you know, that no one is killed. I think on that, and I think, you know, this depends partly on the police, but I think, you know, what we also have to recognize is that there's a lot that's going to depend in this situation on how former President Zuma himself conducts himself.
The reality is that, David, in as much as, you know, we can apportion responsibility on several actors who may or may not be seen to be supporting particular behavior that is illegal, ultimately the enforcement of the law in this country lies with the agencies and the institutions of this country, and they must be able on some level to be held accountable for how they uphold the law.
No, that's absolutely right. But they also have to weigh up the specifics of the situation that they're facing. And so one of the important things to appreciate in this kind of situation is that rather than following an approach which seeks to escalate the situation, the police should use time to their advantage to handle the situation in an optimal manner. So if it's necessary for them to wait a number of days, or, you know, perhaps even longer, in order for them to resolve the situation, it's ultimately better for them to handle the situation in that way. They've got the resources of the state behind them. They can replace personnel. They can keep the people on the ground in the situation there. And if they can manage the situation in a way which avoids the loss of life, that would be for the better on all sides.
So David, ultimately, what does that mean? Because the same crowds that we saw in Nkandla over the weekend, at least we've been told, are going to gather in Pietermaritzburg and in all likelihood will be outside the Constitutional Court on the 12th when this matter is set down to be heard.
Well, I mean, as you and I think some commentators have already raised, there is the issue of anticipating gatherings. There's the potential for preemptive measures to be taken to prevent people from gathering in situations where, gatherings of this kind are not, are prohibited. And so, I think, there is potential for the police to take those kinds of measures in relation to the Pietermaritzburg and Constitutional Court hearings.
Lesiba, let me give you the last word here.
From our side, we are saying that our police officials, they are carrying a great responsibility or a very heavy responsibility on their shoulders, where they need to ensure at all times that they carry themselves within the ambits of the law, within all situations that they are facing. And we strongly believe that further gatherings that might occur, our police officials, they will do what is best and what will ensure that there is no loss of life, what will ensure that there is peace and stability in terms of securing the inhabitants of the Republic and also property concerned with this regard.
All right, let me thank you both for your time tonight on News at Prime. Independent policing researcher David Bruce and Lesiba Thobakgele from the South African Policing Union. He's the spokesperson there.